the odds of me being in that position are so exponentially low. To being given that job, it was almost like it was a gift. And I was so grateful for that gift. And I think that space of gratitude is something I never want to lose.
What happens when we choose to see the opportunity to lead as a gift? I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. You just heard from Mike Matheny, a 4-time Gold Glove catcher, World Series manager, and now an author and executive leadership coach. As a player, Mike spent 13 seasons in the major leagues building his reputation as Mr. Consistency on the field. Though he retired 18 years ago in 2007, he still holds the all-time major league record with 1,565 consecutive errorless chances in the field. After his playing days, Mike went on to become the manager of the St. Louis Cardinals. There, he became the first skipper in Major League Baseball history to lead his team to the playoffs in each of his first 4 seasons, which included leading the Cardinals into the 2013 World Series. But beyond his statistics and successes, both as a player and as a manager, what stands out about Mike is his thoughtful commitment to leading well. In this episode, you'll hear about how playing the position of catcher on the baseball diamond is analogous to the unique perspective leaders have in front of them every day. You'll learn how a life-threatening event Mike experienced in 2024 has brought him to new levels of urgency and intentionality in how he is investing his life. And you'll get a chance to understand just how influential the word gift is in Mike's leadership. But first, we get a window into Mike's upbringing and how the example set by his parents put him on a path toward both success and significance.
Yeah, I think when we all begin, I don't believe any of us really see ourselves in leadership positions. And for me, just watching at home, like all of us, I think we are either rewarded or we're put behind the 8 ball sometimes with our home situation. For me, I won the lottery at birth because I just had 2 parents. We didn't have a lot, but what we had was parents that cared about each other, cared about us, myself and my 3 brothers. The way I like to describe it is the pictures and the words matched up. My parents made it very clear what their priorities were as individuals, what our priority was going to be as family. And then the actions spoke, the way they went about life. We lived in a tiny little house that, man, there was no hiding the truth, and there wasn't any getting away from each other. So we saw a struggle. We saw how to handle successes. Everything was there to be seen, and my parents just stayed so consistent and forever grateful for how they led us. That was the first probably experience I had in leadership. And then after that, Spike, like you, just being in sports,
Yeah,
the power of a coach. That statement, and it's given to a number of different people who is actually the author of the quote. But the quote goes, a coach will impact more people in 1 year than the average person will in a lifetime. I believe it's accredited to Dr. Billy Graham. But anyways, the truth is right. And I'm a walking testament of that as well. I had the crazy football coaches that like, nope, I'm not doing it like that when I become a dad or if I ever coach. And then you had the other coaches. You and I spoke about Joe Ehrman, who talks about transformational instead of transactional coaches. And when you spend time with a transformational coach, it does just that. It changes you. And so it was something that was resounding to me early on, like, hey, if I ever do this, never known if I'd be given the opportunity to coach, let alone to have a livelihood of it. And to realize that that's just kind of a life calling. I'm a coach, and whether it's for my family, whether it's for my friends, whether it's on the baseball field, to have the opportunity to go and be transformational in people's lives. I believe that was witnessed very young from a number of different coaches and the people that I'm still attracted to today.
Well, think about your role when you were playing in your playing days. You're playing the position that is, referred to as the quarterback of a baseball team, which kind of lends itself into some of that leadership. But talk a little bit about, as you were coming into your own through college and then as your professional career took off. What was it like for you? And, were you always thinking about how do I lead an influence? What was your path in that? Because you were certainly over the course of your career, especially towards the end, referred to as that field general type of leader in the clubhouse. But how did that evolve for you?
Yeah, it goes back to that age-old conversation and argument of whether are these born traits or these taught traits. And I believe it's an and proposition. I think there are people that are maybe a little more naturally inclined through their personality, and it goes back through a lot of their upbringing. But even early on, I was a quarterback. I started probably being a quarterback when I was 8 years old. In Central Ohio, you had to play football, and played all the way through high school, and found out I had a really bad habit of throwing it to the wrong jersey. And so that kind of eliminated any future in that.
Hey, they were open, but they were open, Mike.
Wide open, always. It was weird. But it became very obvious to me that I liked being in that position. I didn't mind having what people would call pressure. I never saw that as pressure. Like, that's a privilege of having that opportunity to be in a spot because nobody else wanted to be there. And I think that naturally, as you said, Tim, it naturally translated over to the catching position. When I started catching when I was 10 years old, that was this epiphany my dad had. And he knew I loved baseball. And he just asked, if you're serious about this, he said that the greatest opportunity you're going to have to play as long as you can is as catcher. Nobody wants to do it. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. So I started catching a lot of games. I don't necessarily suggest this to parents or to kids. But once again, we didn't have family vacations. My dad was a hardworking construction guy. So in the summer, it was just, he's working 6/12s every week, just trying to make up because he knew there was going to be a layoff in the bad weather. And so in the summer, it was I either going to sit around the house or play basketball down at the schoolyard, or I get to go play baseball. And I'm going to go play baseball. And so I just jumped into life and then realized that catching position, man, there's just so much. I'd hate to say control because then that makes you sound like a control freak, but there's so many decisions. There's so much depth to that position that's just more than the little 3-foot circle that I stand in. That's my responsibility at first base or my responsibility in the outfield. This has to do with the pitching. It has to do with the game management. It has to do with pitch calling. And I realized the complexity of it. And it was something that just resonated with me.
There's something that's landed me on this moment, and all the baseball people listening are going to laugh because I really like, no kidding, Tim. But I just visually have it in my mind. And the parallel to leadership is wild. You're the only guy facing that direction. Everybody else is facing the other direction. Sitting as the catcher, you have a vision on the game that nobody else is privy to. And that doesn't mean you're always right about everything, but it does mean that you have, whether you talk about it as a privilege to lead, a responsibility to lead, you have that perspective that other people not in that position don't get to have. So the fact that you get to take that in, and now what am I going to do with this unique perspective? I'd never really thought about that parallel so clearly before, but I'm just imagining crouching down behind home plate and you've got a view like nobody else on your team.
Yeah, and I've always been kind of a self-imposed ambassador for the position of catching to make sure that, because most of the time kids kind of gravitate away. It's not a sexy position, right? It's kind of the interior lineman. But as I'm selling it, I'm telling them, hey, listen, guys, every eye is on you. They are waiting for you. Yes, the pitcher has to begin what he's going to do, but he's waiting on you also. So you've got all these people that are waiting for your direction. Let's make a really good decision and lead them well. And it is synonymous as you start talking about the catching position, whether catchers even want to look at it as a leadership position or not. It is, because nothing happens until they get things going.
What was it about, as you think, we're talking about positionally on the field and the metaphor, but ultimately, baseball clubhouse, like this is, I'm a basketball guy. So this idea of sitting around for hours on end, lighting people's shoes on fire and spitting sunflower seeds, like that's not a basketball thing. So talk a little bit about the off the field type of, how does somebody grow into an opportunity to influence and lead teammates in that kind of unique environment of being a Major League Baseball player?
Yeah, you say the word influence, I instantly go towards the fact that that's what leadership is. Leadership is influence, and leadership's defined by followership. And you find in a clubhouse culture, and that it's as little as its own kind of subculture and community, you just find people naturally gravitating towards other people. Yes, some for just camaraderie and friendship, but when it gets down time to get the work done, you'll see that there are people that are just all of a sudden looking towards something needs to be done. Who are they looking towards? And once again, I think there's people that embrace that and figure out ways to increase that influence for good. And then there's other people that run from it because there's pressure that comes along with it. And I keep coming back to, is that a privilege? Or is that something that's going to draw you into a tough spot and make your job harder? And for me, for whatever reason, I loved having that responsibility because I think a lot of that comes down to, did I do the work to prepare for this? And most of the time, that was something that I knew I could do. I wasn't nearly as talented as most of the guys in the Major League clubhouse. And this isn't some sort of false humility. Tim, I was released twice before I ever got to the Cardinals, and then started being able to win some games and be given some accolades. But the game tried to get rid of me a couple times, but there were a couple things I knew I could do. And one of it is to do the preparation, to then have a pitching staff rely on me. And most of that's just rolling up the sleeve and doing the work.
Yeah.
You go back to your very first question, Tim, some of the greatest influencers in my life were old-time catchers that just rewired how I thought about my job. And my job was about that guy 60 feet, 6 inches away. He is the most important person on your planet. Whenever you're asked who your favorite pitcher is, it's whoever's on the rubber right now. that guy. And then the next guy that comes out there, and for them to feel that when they walked in there. So when you start to build those relationships, whether it's in a boardroom or in a classroom or whether it's in a locker room, people start to realize that they can trust you because you have their best interest in mind. There's a natural gravitation, I believe, towards that person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that that's true in life. We tend to be more open and more connected, even more willing to listen to people who we believe they're not in this conversation to get something. They're not in this conversation for themselves. They're in their conversation for me, for others. And then it's a lot more open, like, okay, what's the hard thing I need to hear if I know you're for me? And I think that's pretty universal. We receive messages from people that are for us differently than we receive messages for people that we're not sure are for us. And that's true even when it's the exact same message. So I want to get into your coaching as you kind of exit your playing days. But before we do, I have to ask you a question. And I hadn't even planned for us to talk about this, but it just popped into my mind. You have a very unfortunate and unique reality of having been hit in the face with a pitch. And you got up to bat and played the next day. How, I mean, I know this is not necessarily on the topic of leadership, but my question is very simple. How on earth do you step into a batter's box with this really hard object flying fast, knowing the day before you literally took one in the face? How did you do that?
My oral surgeon is well aware that happened, and so's the insurance company because they keep losing teeth almost every year. But the backstory to that was I was not a good hitter at all. I just had to scratch and claw. I was good with what I did behind the plate, and I was in Milwaukee, and my manager just got tired of me swinging at breaking balls with 2 strikes and striking out with breaking balls. And so he calls me in and he goes, all right, we got to do something different here. I'm tired of watching you swing at 2-strike sliders and curveballs. Every time you strike out with an off-speed breaking ball pitch, you owe me a sleeve of golf balls. And and so I'm sitting there thinking, okay. And I made my mind up. I'm not buying that man any golf balls. I love him. I'll run through wall. I'll do anything for him, but I'm not buying him golf balls. You know? So I left that room, and I got the 2 strikes, and it was, man, I was one of those guys. You could almost throw in that maybe overcoachable. Like you tell me to go up there and grab the barrel of the bat and try to hit with a handle. I'd probably try. I'd do whatever you told me to do, and so it was working. I'm getting to 2 strikes, and I'm not buying him any golf balls. So I'm not striking out with breaking balls. So we're playing against the Pirates. And for some reason, I'm hitting in the 9th inning, which they almost always pinch hit for me in the 9th. But I'm going up to the bat, and the tying run is on first base, and I get to 2 strikes. And they bring in their closer. His name's Rich Loisel, who threw 96, 97, which back then, that was really hard. And I get to 2 strikes, and it's in my head. It's already become my norm that I'm not striking out on a breaking ball. I'm just sitting on soft. And he let one go with 2 strikes. It started up here where it would normally break, and it didn't break, and it hit me right in the jaw. So another part of that story, it was the first time that one of our owners in Milwaukee gave my wife and our kids their box seats right down in the first couple rows.
Oh my goodness.
I'm losing a lot of blood. And I remember being mad that I got hit. I should have been happy because that's the best thing somebody could do is hit me because that means I'm getting on base. The end of the story is we end up winning this game. We come back and come from behind. But anyway, I remember thinking I need to go to first, but I'm bleeding so bad. I don't want to pass out on this field. And so teeth and blood, and I'm walking out, and they take me to the ER and they stitch me up, and they couldn't believe that a half-inch higher would have broke my orbital bone, half-inch lower would have broken my jaw, but it just busted teeth. So I was cut from front to back. So I talked with the doctors, and I just say, here's the deal. And, I want to play. And they said, oh, you should be all right. It's going to hurt really bad because your face is going to swell up like a balloon. You're going to bleed a lot, but just manage that. And so I go back that night and go straight to Gar's office. And I said, if you could do me one favor, I want to play tomorrow. 2 reasons. One is the jump back on the horse theory. And 2, I knew Gar would love that. And the fact that that's the kind of team that he wanted, that we're going to get in there, we're going to grind. And I'll never forget the next day I went out for batting practice and the Pirates were out there stretching and they saw that I was in the lineup. And a couple of them went out of their way, which I didn't make friends on the field. It wasn't my job. But they came over and said, I want to tell you, that's one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
Wow. Well, let's move forward then. You finish your playing days and you get asked to coach a youth baseball team. And what comes out of that is a letter, now known as the Matheny Manifesto. Talk a little bit about why you were motivated to go to that extent and say, you know what? I got some ground rules. So talk a little bit about how you ended up even thinking I'm going to write this letter.
Yeah, it wasn't something that had much forethought in it. What it was really me almost trying to give the parents an out. So I just finished playing. My career had ended by concussions. One of them probably was that pitch to the face. But they wanted me to come coach, and I just wanted to make sure they understood that I saw youth sports a little differently than maybe what the norm was. We have 5 kids. Our kids are all sporty. So we spent as much time as we could, and it was a lot of times we spent at the baseball fields, hockey rinks, soccer fields, etc. And I noticed that there had been a shift. And so I wrote it out, that Matheny Manifesto. That was actually tongue-in-cheek from one of the assistant coaches. He thought that was funny. And he liked the content, but he thought it was maybe even a little over the top. But what I did, I was coming back. I was doing a little bit of commentating on ESPN, and I was flying back from the East Coast. And I said, I'm just going to write him a letter. We have a meeting at our house. I'm just going to read it to him. And I'm just typing away. And next thing I know, I'm like, good night. This is a lot of stuff. And it
hey, we've seen Jerry Maguire. It's like you got going and you just got going and kept going.
And it was just truth. And I 100% can tell you, I was 50-50 on whether or not that they were going to agree to this, because it was so almost radical of, hey, we're going to redefine success and we're going to invest into these boys. We're going to teach them baseball. Absolutely. Can't help it. But we're going to make that secondary. We're going to talk about character. We're going to talk about all the life lessons that come from being in a team sport, and then listed some of those out and asked the parents at some point, if this works, I'd love your input to help me put together. We're going to take time out of practice and do some character studies, because I believe the success is going to be the young men that baseball has that little bit of a help. You as a parent, you're the lead role. We're an assistant role. How can we help these young men grow into young men that are dads and that are brothers and husbands and friends and contributors to community, just different maker and world changers? And how can we use our little time that we have on the baseball field to help that? And man, I remember as I'm reading this letter, and we had a bunch of really good parents in this room, people that are high-level executives all across the board. And I'm reading this letter and I'm like, this sounded a whole lot better on the airplane while I was typing it. And it's like I'm scolding these poor people. And at the end, it was silence. Nobody walked out, and I literally made them sign it and said, if you agree to this, I'm doing you a favor. I'm taking the pressure off of you to have to be the wild and craziest parent out there. Turn them over to me, and we're going to teach them baseball. And I'll give you some things that you can do at home to help them improve in baseball. But let's just reframe what success looks like for this particular team, and that we're going to go have a great time, and we're going to love the game of baseball and help them grow as people.
Did anybody say no?
Not one, but we had some guidelines and some rules about some of the things that we're not going to do. We're just not going to fall into you calling me about Johnny Jr. and where he hits in the batting order and what position that he's playing. We're just not going to do it. And I got challenged on that, and unfortunately lost friendships by having to ask people to leave. And I brought out the contract, and I go, I know we're friends. I warned them one time. The second time they did, I go, here's the deal. I'm sorry, but we love you, and we're going to miss you.
Yeah. How old were the kids that you were coaching?
When we started out, they were 9.
It actually brings up an interesting point regarding standards, because ultimately, part of leading is setting standards. And in my view, anytime a contract is involved, you should know that it's probably something hard. If I'm having to sign something and say, I promise, you can talk about a contract for work, you can talk about marriage. The interesting idea of having to commit to something, to me, it gives away, like, you should know that it's going to be hard at some point, because I've never had to sign a contract to eat more Twinkies. Like, not one time in my life have I had to sign a contract for that. And for us as leaders, when we're setting standards, we would be foolish to think at some point, I'm not going to have to enforce these. At some point, it's going to be difficult enough. And frankly, I'd say every violation of a standard is an opportunity to teach and learn about what we're going to be about and to set the culture. But you do get to a point, if somebody continues to bump over that line, where you're going to have to say, hey, you're going to have to go do what you do somewhere else. And I think the contract is a clue for us. If I've got to make a commitment and sign my name to something, I should just expect at some point that the thing that I don't want to have to do, I'm probably going to have to do, because it's going to be hard.
Yes, 100%. And just going down that road, the right thing is just very seldom the easy thing in general, right? And it's a shame that there has to be sometimes contracts that draw us to what the agreed upon thing is, when I think of many times that we understand the right thing. It's just normally the hard thing. And so I've been, as I look behind you and see all the books, and you can see behind me the same, man. We've had some great mentors of people that we've never even met. One that jumps out to me is the book Radical Candor, where it's just, man, what a privilege, but obligation to stick to truth. And as you're saying, in leadership, to stick to the right thing, even though it's really, really hard. And some of those conversations of whether it is pulling back to say, okay, here's contractually where we were, or whether it's just, this is what we said we were going to do, and you need to know truth. This is going to be a very hard conversation. I'm going through that right now with my adult kids. There's sometimes where I know where, man, it's just sometimes hard to be completely candid with some tough topics. And man, when we don't hit those face to face, almost always there are negative ramifications.
But you had to be willing to let go of friendships in order to follow through on that. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. When you were just talking, we're talking about youth baseball, but you had said, here's how we're going to do it. And you were willing to walk that out when, I mean, there was a warning. It wasn't just like one and done, but you had to be willing to hold the line.
Yeah. I think some of it's self-preservation, because I knew if I'd kept dealing with that stuff, I'd have quit. And I'm not a quitter, but I just knew it was going to be miserable. That's part one. Part two is, man, people watch really close when you get to those break points, right? Like when you get to those spots where this is what he said, what's he going to do? Like, I remember being in the clubhouse. The guys couldn't wait until I made, and we didn't have a ton of rules. It was, hey, man, just do the next right thing. That, and I'm going to let you police that. When you guys start struggling with that a little bit, come see me. That's when you come in the office, when you guys can't get it sorted out, when you need a little help. But when I put a firm line down, like, this is something that we're going to stand for. And the guys couldn't wait to see how I was going to respond. because they knew that it was going to be really hard and somehow it was going to hurt somebody. And I think that's our greatest chance, maybe. I mean, I don't think anybody listening to the podcast today would ever argue with the fact that it's during those tough times that leadership is really defined. And those tough times in life are in those tough decisions within your corporation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you said it, the right thing is almost always a difficult thing to do. And it's really interesting as we talk about research around being others focused and those kinds of things. It can sound a little bit like happy talk if you don't think about the real application, but sometimes the most loving thing that we can do as we care about the people we're leading is to hold the standard that they don't like, the standard that they don't want, and we're doing it not only for their good, but for the good of the organization. And there are some times where people aren't going to learn that lesson until they're somewhere else. And that's just the difficult fact of life. So even as we care about people, that doesn't mean that they're always going to like us. They might be real unhappy with us at some points. And that's where we have to be secure enough in who we are as leaders to be okay with that, where we're not just running around, trying to get everybody's approval and hugs all the time. So it's back to that, the kind of privileged responsibility of leadership. There are the hard things that come along with it. We're going to come back to your managing career, but the reason I want to jump forward is I want to talk just a little bit about the dad coach, because this is something, if we were to go Matheny Manifesto and pull it forward into 2025, talk a little bit about the dad coach and what you've got going on with that.
Yeah, so we took that letter. I was challenged a number of times of, hey, why don't you give us a little bit more about this? I was approached by a couple publishers about writing a book. And I was just right in the middle of starting managing. And I went from literally from little leagues to the big leagues as a big league manager with nothing in between, which is like, I know every little league coach out there thinks that he should be able to do that as well. But anyway, I was actually given that gift. And I realized that I had this limited opportunity to kind of use that platform. Yes, as a former player, but now as a manager who just lived through a lot of the youth sports stuff. And so I felt it was a great opportunity. I reached out to one of my favorite authors. I just cold called Mr. Jerry Jenkins. And Jerry's got a long resume of incredible books and people that he's written books with and for. And Jerry agreed. He loved the concept. He had grandkids that were in sports and kids that were at one point also. And so we jumped in and kind of defined that hey, I think we're getting off track with youth sports. Let's redefine success. And the cool thing was, Spike, is that a lot of people didn't like it. That means I said something. And we just threw it out there. And so that kind of defined that, yes, we see there's an issue, but we never really attacked, okay, how can we do this a little differently? So really the dad coach, we went and we got that group of boys that I coached who have now become men and leading their own families. And I told them, like, hey, we're getting a little bit of interest in maybe doing a follow-up book. And I'd love for you guys to be in the middle of this. You guys are going to help direct this. And that was our board. And they designed kind of the concept, what they would like to pass on, and even structural, where they developed the QR codes to where we have 75 QR codes through the book that you just hit with your phone. And it takes you to videos that can further explain all the how to run a practice, how obligations at a game, how to clean uniforms, how to get the proper sized equipment, and just links. And we wanted this to be a give back. And so the whole idea was let's give as much, let's overdo on our end of giving and make it a great resource. And all the proceeds went to help build a field down in the Dominican Republic, which is near and dear to that whole team. We had a kind of our send-off trip down there, which was life-changing. But it's just been a fun project of just giving some young dad coaches, the guy that maybe drew the short straw or is the last man standing, to say, okay, you're the coach. He doesn't know where to begin. We're trying to give him enough, at least in the beginning years, and then they can hand it over to the professionals and some of the higher level coaches and teams.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Well, now we've gone forward. Now let's go back to the story that you were just referencing. Okay, I've played, now I've coached Little League. My next move, obviously, is going to be to coach a Major League Baseball team. And not only Major League manager, but a Major League manager of one of the most storied clubs in all of Major League Baseball history, the St. Louis Cardinals. I know the Yankees fans are screaming right now. I said one of, And the Cardinals, I lived in St. Louis. That's where Mike and I originally met. And for those of you that are in that area, you know what an amazing baseball city St. Louis is. Lots of scrutiny, lots of interest, to put it mildly. And here you are, the manager of the Cardinals, without ever having managed a pro team of any kind, which is incredibly unique. Talk a little bit about how that unfolded and what are your thoughts heading into, I'm coaching the Little League team and now I'm the manager for the St. Louis Cardinals.
Yeah, completely wild ride. Now, I did obviously played the game professionally for a long time. It's not like I was a Walmart greeter and they said, all right, now you can go manage the Cardinals. So there was baseball there. Plus, I was at the time in the 2011 season and the 2010 season, I was the roving catching instructor. So I was a little bit in the organization, but I had not managed, which that's a leadership position. It's baseball, yeah, but it's mostly a leadership position. So the fact that the 2011 team is fighting through a major comeback. I talked to Tony La Russa in September, and he tells me that he thinks he's going to be done. And I'm thinking, that's hard to believe because you're on a great roll. They go on and win the World Series in 2011. And I'm a distant part. I'm not on the day-to-day staff, but I'm part of the organization. I get a call 2 weeks later after they win the World Series, and it's actually a text from our general manager, John Mozeliak. And it says, this is a Wednesday, and he says, I need you in my office on Friday to interview for the managerial job. And I remember sitting there thinking, it's so sad somebody stole Mo's phone and and sent me a really messed up text. Like that's just not right. So we connect and I realize that he's serious. And I feel at the time that it's almost just a little bit of just an encouragement. Like, we've got some big names coming in. This is a very storied franchise. Okay. And to back up what you said earlier, yes, there's a lot of teams that take offense to what you said of being one of the most storied. But just historically, the data is what it is. The New York Yankees have the most World Series championships in history. Second team most people don't know is the St. Louis Cardinals. And so it is what it is. And it is a very baseball hungry town. And for them to even invite me into that set of interviews was open for scrutiny all by itself, just bringing me in. So I get a hold of my board of advisors. I have a personal board of advisors. I get my guys together and I say, I got 2 days to cram for the toughest test in my life right now because I've had a lot of exams, but most of them are out in the dirt. I've never had an interview, never had any reason for it. And I walk into a 6-hour interview situation and I remember being so over-prepared and maybe not a lot to lose. I'm this little league coach guy who kind of has been helping a little bit with the catchers. And walked out of there just skipping, man, just so grateful for the honor of being in that room. And next thing you know, they do the unthinkable and they turn over the World Series championship team to a guy that's never coached before.
There are some people listening that are thinking about professional moves, and they would say, yeah, it's amazing that you got that opportunity, Mike. But who is the guy who's not thinking it through to take the job after they win the World Series? And for people who know the story, so it looks like, the idea is like, let's go someplace where they haven't been winning. Let's go someplace where there's nowhere but up. In one respect, there's nowhere but down. However, you end up becoming the first manager in Major League history to lead your team to the playoffs in each of your first 4 years as a manager. So you effectively kept that success going. You're having success in to put it mildly, a very competitive field. And here you are, playoff. What's it like for you to, pardon the pun here, manage yourself as a leader in the midst of all of that early success?
Well, first of all, I had a couple coaches who turned me down to be a part of our staff because they believed that we were set up for failure. And, you think we just lost Hall of Fame manager Tony La Russa. Cardinal Hall of Fame pitching coach Dave Duncan was kind of the nuts and bolts of making that pitching staff what it was. He also had left, and we just lost the best player over the past 10 years in Albert Pujols, who just signed with Anaheim. And so all of those things were pointing in a direction of, this must be a rebuild kind of thing. I was fortunate to have a gentleman by the name of Red Shanedees, who's a Cardinal Hall of Famer. He's a baseball Hall of Famer in Cooperstown as well. And Red told me, he said, all right, Mike, here's the secret to winning. Get really good players. And I said, Red, that's sage advice. That's brilliant, Red. I will see what they're willing to do up in the front office. But he's right. And we were fortunate. We had really good players. But I also know that we all play our role. And my role, once again, as I learned, I didn't know when I took this job, what I learned is that job, like many jobs in leadership, is 10% nuts and bolts of baseball. And it's 90% people. And we were managing people and putting out fires. I had no idea the stuff that was going to walk into that office. And it was very seldom baseball stuff. It was people stuff. And so what we did is we just kind of rolled up our sleeves and just tried to be that transformational coach that we talked about, is to invest into people. All the things that we've covered already, I wanted it to be, it's not about me and a resume. It's not about how many years we can be the first manager to, that's not it. Let's go and make this about the other people, make this about my guys, and make this about the organization. Find what that standard is of expectation, continue to build that culture, not just rest on what that culture has been. How can we build this to make it more applicable today with the people that we have today? And how can we just take the baton and keep moving that thing forward? And fortunately, we had a great mix of talent. We had a great mix of leadership inside that clubhouse, which I can't say enough about. We had guys in the right positions that were sharing the right messages that continued to make things look like we wanted them to look like. That's priceless. And then we just had to put our nose in there and figure out a way to fight.
You know, your time in St. Louis is really interesting because, kind of back to what a baseball town it is, you have a ton of success, but then comes your departure from the Cardinals, even with a winning record. And I'm going to call this a privilege. I had the privilege. I almost get emotional thinking about this, Mike, because I watched, as I mentioned to you last time when we were catching up, I watched your interview with Frank Cusimano, and I was just amazed at the grace and gratitude. You know, professional athletics is not full of people expressing grace and gratitude when they get fired. That's not the norm. But over and over again, Frank gave you lots of opportunities to say other things than that, as his job is. Talk a little bit about that experience, because you've had a ton of success. You're getting let go even with a winning record, but your attitude is one that's just saying thank you an awful lot. How do you get there? How do you end up in that kind of mind space and heart space as a leader?
I think, first of all, is probably having an acute awareness. And I know for fact, even anyone that's listening to this thing right now, I mean, it's the odds of me being in that position are so exponentially low. To being given that job, it was almost like this was a gift. And I was so grateful for that gift and walked in there with that, almost that mindset. Even we go to the World Series, we win the National League pennant, show up that next year like this is still a gift. And I think that space of gratitude is something I never want to necessarily lose. But I played the game in a way that people talk about a lot, like it's going to be the last one you ever play. I literally played the game that way because I knew there were more talented people than me. And I knew I had to do my part. This isn't just some gift that's thrown on you and it's all good. You just sit there and keep receiving the gift. No, I got to go out and work. Everybody else everywhere. That's just how I had to be. And I'm so grateful that I wasn't so uber talented that I could just throw my spikes on and tell everybody to get out of the way. I had to go earn it. And the same thing went as a manager. I knew I was underqualified. I knew I was underexperienced, but I'm going to stick my face in there and I'm going to keep coming. And next thing you know, man, I've had this opportunity to do something that should have never happened. And we had a lot of success and we could be really proud of how we went about it. And we continued to kind of keep the high standard of expectation. And then, it's funny, when I got the job spike, I got the job announced on a Sunday. Monday morning, Hall of Fame manager Whitey Herzog called me up and said, I need you to meet me for lunch today. Yes, sir. I show up. I walk in, he shakes my hand, and before he lets go of my hand, he says, you need to get your head around this. As manager of this team, you're either going to die on the job or you're going to get fired. So just get your head around that. And I'm like, well, thanks for that welcome into the fraternity. And so with that in mind, you're always realizing like that is just part of the gig. And then I kept coming back. What a great gift. With all things, and there's plenty of backstory, side story of things of why the timing was just impeccable for us as a family. But to be able to jump in and we did good. And to realize what a gift that was for me to leave and have any kind of negative or have any kind of bite to the people that put themselves on the line by hiring me to begin with, because they did. It was a reach. And many people would say it was an experiment. There was a number of other managers with similar background that were hired after, like, hey, if that guy can do it, maybe this guy. And some worked, some not so much, but realized they took a chance on me, and I'm always going to be grateful for that.
Yeah. Wow. What a tremendous perspective for all of us to pay attention to. Now, for the baseball people listening, they know that you went on and became a part of the Royals organization. And eventually the Royals moved you into the job of manager there, which didn't end up having as many wins in it. Let's talk about managing the Royals. And you've got certainly a very different win-loss on the field, but you're the same person. You're the same leader. To somebody who might look at the story and say, well, yeah, but what about this over there? There weren't a lot of playoff wins in Kansas City when Mike was there. What's the story? What would you share with them?
Yeah, I love talking with our players, even in Kansas City, losing almost 100 games, but seeing the development. And my answer would be that we didn't get the playoffs. I just ran out of time. And I understand where ownership was, but we were going to get there. There's no doubt. There was no doubt in my mind, no doubt in the mind of the staff. I was so excited to go to Kansas City after being let go from St. Louis. I didn't know how it was going to unfold. There was a couple reasons. One, geographically, I wanted to still be close to where my family, which my kids were either just starting college or were in high school, to be available and to make it a little easier on my wife. That was part of it. But that was probably hand in hand tied for first with leadership from the general manager at the time. His name was Dayton Moore. Dayton was somebody that I witnessed his leadership style from across the diamond and through the eyes of other people inside the game, and how he led and how he kind of went about the business in baseball a little bit differently, with just this crazy mix of intensity but high character. And it was Dayton more than anything else that drew me to Kansas City. And Dayton, which people don't give him the credit, he took 100 losses in a year team and ended up taking them to the World Series in 2014 and 2000. They win in 2015 with not much of a budget to spend. And that, to watch how they did that and how he built culture, that was really the draw to me. And they got into a spot where they weren't winning, but I knew he knew part of how to build that. And I wanted to be part of that story. It's one thing taking a World Series team. It'd be easy to say, well, just don't screw it up, right? But to take a team that had been losing 100 games a year and be part of building that up again to win the World Series again, man, I'm in. And especially with a high character leader to follow.
Yeah. Well, we did a good job covering baseball here. So I'm going to jump forward to something far more recent. And that is in January of 2024, you had a major health scare crisis, to put it mildly. You had a subarachnoid hemorrhage. And I just want to have you talk a little bit about the experience of going through that. Here you are, somebody who made your livelihood as an athlete, somebody who's out there, somebody who is healthy. And then you get a chance to deal with this crazy situation that could have easily ended your life.
Yeah, I would say it might be the most powerful experience of my life. Once again, one of those things you'd never want to go through again or watch anybody else. But my wife and I have become snowbirds. So we go south in the winter when it gets cold. And the second day we were down in South Florida, I go in for a normal workout. And I'm not even 20 minutes into just getting loose. I haven't done anything stupid yet. And all of a sudden I feel something in the back of my head, top of my neck, that isn't right. And so I make my way out of the gym. I can't get any further than the front door. Unfortunately, there was a chair there, and I sit down and I call my wife. And I said, listen, I don't know what I did, but I can't even get home. I need you to come get me. I need to go lay down. And so she comes and picks me up, and I find out later a couple things. One is she wasn't real happy because she was on her way to a hair appointment. And the free marital advice, don't get in the way of those. Second part is I found out that if I had gone home and laid down, that I'd have never woken up. And so by the time I'm semi-coherent in the ICU, a neurosurgeon comes in and said, Mike has suffered from a subarachnoid hemorrhage, which is a bleeding on the brain. We don't know a lot about where this comes from. What we do know is this: it happens to 6 out of every 100,000 people in the general population. Of those 6, 3 will die before they ever get to the ICU. Of the remaining 3, 1 will die in the ICU. Of the remaining 2, 1 will have lifelong brain damage, and we're going to do everything that we can so that Mike will be that one. And, I'm kind of hearing this. I know my wife is completely hearing this. So we spend 20 days before I ever get out of bed. And like you said, Swag, I was probably in as good a shape as any point in my life. And then all of a sudden, this. And I say it's one of the most powerful, impactful, meaningful experiences in my life, because I don't think very often we get into those places where we completely lose control. And I was there. And I was also in that proverbial valley of the shadow of death. And I want to tell you, I had a great peace. And that wasn't anything that I deserved. And that was a gift. And I don't even think it was meant for me to be saying right now. It was for me to sense. And I sensed that. At one point, the surgeon had my kids come in to say goodbye. So all 5 kids flew in and struggled through that. Who gets to be on the other side of that? So all these things compound and then turn a corner. Went back for a whole bunch of more testing at the Mayo Clinic and got into some great medical hands that confirmed everything that had been said. And it was just something that happened. So on the backside, gratitude. Gratitude that, I got to be on the other side of that. Gratitude to be in that spot and in that space and to be overwhelmed with, you're good. Mm. Not sure how this works out. You're good. And that's just a whole deeper faith conversation. But I left there, Tim, with 2 words: urgency and impact. And I've always had an urgency, feel like I have in life, never more so than now after that particular experience. And then the urgency to, what am I doing with this? Am I doing something good to impact other people? Not about me, but how can I use this newly experienced joy of life and the message of, let's make the most of today. Let's not waste this one, because we never know when we're going to be one of those 100,000. And let's make something good of it.
Wow. Well, what a great bridge for us to wrap up here talking about what you're doing now. You step out of that with this idea of urgency and impact. Let's talk about how you're applying that today through your work, through your executive coaching, through your speaking. What is it that you're up to? You take this whole raft of amazing experiences that we've been talking about, and you're putting it into service now. Talk about that.
Yeah, and I think it's just a continuation of that urgency of making myself available. And so I have a group of people that I just check in with and that I try and serve. And I want to tell you, it's hard for me. I'm selfish like everybody else. It keeps coming around to, how does this affect me, and what's going to be the bottom line? And that's something that I fight like everybody else does too. But I've found that I'm better now than I used to be about, this isn't about you. And I've had a great run of things that are about me. I'm going to dive into this being more about my wife, being more about my kids. And we have our 9th grandchild on the way. How can it be more about them? And then I do believe that there is a lot of overlap between the clubhouse and the boardroom. And how can I go and serve some people in leadership positions? You and I had this conversation before, Tim. I truly believe there are many people that are listening and watching this today that you've climbed this ladder, and it's a lonely place when you get there. And even though I wouldn't say the manager of a baseball team is the highest rung on that ladder, but it's the voice and it's the face. And I know this, that almost every time my phone buzzed, rang, or someone came to the door, there was some sort of a withdrawal. And I was very, very fortunate that I had some people making deposits into me. I mentioned my personal board. One of those personal board members traveled with me on every road trip. I took him on every trip, and he would challenge me and had the carte blanche to challenge me on the things that I say are most important: my faith and my family and my job, and how I'm going about doing that. And then we also used, while I had him there, we used that as an opportunity to start putting together some leadership character studies that we were intentional while we were on the road away from family. We'd get together and we'd just have some things that we would talk about that he would help lead through. Because once again, I believe that leadership, it can be one of those spots where we all just get so inundated with the next issue and doing that next right thing that we forget to invest into ourselves. And pretty soon it's simple math that account gets overdrawn. So I wanted to be one of those people. And sometimes it's a micro investment where I've got a group of about 50, some I just send a daily text to. Other, I'm just on call. And man, I'm trying to, you wouldn't know it by this interview, but I'm trying to do a better job of not talking so much and listening better, and just trying to be a source of support for people that are out there in the grind and doing it, man. And how can I help you get to where you want to be?
Well, as you're now bridging over, doing more work in the business space and taking the leadership lessons from early in your life, on average, what are some of the things, what are some of the parallels, and you're maybe getting at it a little bit here with this idea of how do we make sure that leaders are having some of that deposit within themselves so they have something to give, but what are some of the common things that you're seeing that executive leaders really need?
I love talking about this, and been trying to do some speaking and gather some of these thoughts like, okay, here's some things that I know that have helped guys beat the odds at, one, getting to the major leagues, but then staying in the major leagues. But what about the ones that may not be the most talented, that truly maximize the gifts they have? The ones that aren't necessarily the top tier talent. Talented, yes, so they don't get there. But what are the ones that set them apart? And so those are the things that I believe are transferable, Tim. And, I go towards growth, and I have the acrostic for edges, competitive edges, which is education and constantly learning, no matter where you are on that ladder. Are you keeping the throttle down? Because I find that being a separator where there's just some people that can't turn it off, that staying curious, that staying hungry. I think it was Lencioni that said humble, hungry, and smart, that combination that keeps them always pushing the needle forward. I love that. I think that's the first one. I think then it goes the D whenever I talk is always the discipline of doing that next right thing, which sounds easy, but a couple parts of that, you and I said from the beginning, it's almost always the really hard thing. Are you willing to do that despite? And then how are you hedging the bets by who you're surrounding yourself with? And it goes into putting that board together of people that can, one, hold you accountable, and two, help you grow. I think there's an element of grit and toughness that has to come along with leadership. What Jim Collins wrote in Good to Great is talking about that window in the mirror where you're constantly deflecting any of the praise and you're absorbing all the criticism, even the stuff that you don't deserve. There's certainly something that's gritty and tough. That's the kind of leader I want to follow. And the next one, I call it the E flywheel, which it's really this combination of energy and enthusiasm that I believe are optional. We get so caught up in our circumstances sometimes that we opt out of bringing a life and a love for whatever it is that we're doing and for the people that we're with. And I've seen people in some crazy, crazy hard circumstances that have every reason in the world not to, but choose to show up with energy and enthusiasm for whatever it is they're doing and for the people. And that's loving people, which is a jacked up world, but it is true. And then every once in a while, figuring out a way how to encourage. So enthusiasm and energy sprinkled in some encouragement by just going out of your way to try and make it about somebody else. And it turns into this self-perpetuating ball that just permeates everywhere. And then the last step, which I believe is the most important for every leader, and it gets back to something with only leaders worth following, it's just this idea of servant leadership where, man, this ain't about me. I'm always going to fight that because we're human. It's human nature. We're going to fight us. We're going to fight the desire of what's in it for me. But when I can get out of there just for a fraction of a second, I know gets back to that impactful, transformational style leadership. You're just going to create an atmosphere where people care. and where people do a little bit more than what they would normally do. And so you combine those things together, that applies on a baseball field in a clubhouse. Man, that plays in corporate America. It plays just about everywhere. And it's a message that I can use a little bit of the baseball analogies and stories to help people see that I believe this stuff's worth the effort.
What an incredible visit with Mike Matheny. So thankful for the time that he spent with us and for the wisdom that he shared. Now, usually at the end of an episode, I've got a couple of things that I want to emphasize, 2 or 3 things that really got my attention. But today, in spite of how full that entire conversation was of value and wisdom, there's actually just one thing I want to zero in on today, and it is the idea of the gift. Mike talked about coming out of his season of leading the St. Louis Cardinals that even though he got fired, he looked at the whole thing as a gift. And that just really struck me as pretty profound. What happens to us when we don't just assume that we should have these leadership opportunities, no matter how experienced or successful we've been in the past? What if we maintained that attitude that the opportunity to lead is, in fact, a gift? I think it would change everything, really. What if we kept that attitude? And some of you might be thinking as I lean into this, well, you don't know all of the challenges that I'm dealing with. It's nearly impossible to look at leading for me in this season as a gift. Well, the first thing I want to say, if that's you, is I want to acknowledge that you very well might be in an incredibly difficult situation right now that feels weighty and maybe doesn't even feel like it has a solution. So I don't want to ignore that. But even as I acknowledge that, I want us to think back for the time when you wanted this leadership position, when you wanted the opportunity to lead in the spaces and places where you currently are, whether that be at work or at home. In many ways, despite the challenges any of us might be going through as leaders right now, for almost all of us, there was a time when we wanted more than anything to have this opportunity. So, having acknowledged that things can, in fact, be hard, there are a few things I want to go over that are a huge bonus, a huge plus for us as leaders if we will maintain this perspective that getting to lead is a gift. And in order to do that, I'm going to use an example of something specifically that I am walking through right now as a leader, something that's been pretty challenging and something that I thought of as soon as I got done with my conversation with Mike. And that is video projects. Now, that might not sound very weighty as I say that, but we are in the midst of recording and editing over 50 videos. And we're doing that so that we can bring our research, our message, and our process to a greater number of people that we could reach through a digital platform as opposed to always having to be in person. And I will tell you, it's a slog. It's been rough. It's been difficult. There have been delays. Of course, all of those things are true. And yet, when I look at how my attitude has shifted, I have lost the perspective that this is a gift. And if I would adopt that, get back to that idea, I mean, it's not that hard to think back on a time. Our company is 12 years old. I can remember in the first year when I realized I was going to get to do this for a second year and how thankful I was. And then when I realized, oh, I think I'm going to get to do this for 3, maybe even 4. And here we are now at 12. And if I could get back to that perspective, we went back to the first year of Tim Spiker leading the Aperio. And if you were to say to that person, hey, Tim, there's going to be a day where you are going to have the opportunity and the resources to create more than 50 videos to help people understand this research, this message, and this process. If you had told me that 11 years ago, I would have been over the moon. But here I sit at my desk, going through every detail of these videos. And in most days recently, I've had not the greatest attitude. I've had one that looked at this as a huge burden, just an enormous challenge. And maybe on one hand, it is that. But isn't it also a gift that I get to lead in this way, to get to share things that are hopefully very helpful to people? That's our intent. When I break it down like that and I think about this project that has been lingering on much longer than it's intended, but we're still fighting through it. And so as I paint that picture for you, you can ask the question of yourself, is there anything in my life as a leader where perhaps I've lost that gift mentality? But there are three things as I see it that I would gain that would be very positive for me and the people around me if I would get back to a gift mentality with regard to all of my leadership, but specifically here as we talk about leading through this video project. The first one is I would just have a better attitude for other people to be around. My presence wouldn't be one that's kind of leaning towards the negative, but it would be one that's leaning towards the positive. Other people feel that when they're around you and around me. And so the first thing it would do is it would impact my attitude for the better. The second thing I see is more perseverance for the struggle. This project has been, frankly, one struggle after another. But if I'm able to see the opportunity as a gift that's been given, then I'm far more likely to lean into that perseverance with all that I have. And the third thing that would come along with that is more motivation to do it well. If I see that I've been given the gift of a platform, an opportunity, the resources in order to record these things, now I want to leverage that gift. I want to take advantage of it in all the best ways. There are so many positives if I can have a perspective that this is a gift, that the opportunity to lead is a gift, even when leading is difficult and challenging. All this kind of taps into the idea of discretionary effort. That is the get to rather than the have to. And so many times in leadership, we're talking about how do we tap into that discretionary effort of others, of the people that we're leading? How do we help them move towards a perspective that they get to participate as opposed that they have to? But when I think about shifting my mentality towards seeing my opportunities as a leader as a gift, I'm tapping into my own discretionary effort. I'm moving myself towards a get-to mentality rather than a have-to mentality. And some of you might be thinking, well, isn't this just kind of semantics? It's like a nice little psychological trick you're playing on yourself. And I don't think that it is. And the reason I don't think that it is because there was a day that I can remember very vividly when I didn't have these opportunities. So I don't think it's just a psychological trick. What I actually think it is truth. I actually think seeing the opportunity to influence somebody else's life in a positive way, that's what leaders do every single day, that it truly is a gift. It's truth to see it as a gift, not just a crafty psychological trick. So all of that leads me to the question I want to leave you with today, and that is this. What in your life as a leader do you need to see as a gift? This is Tim Spiker reminding you to be worth following and to follow us wherever you receive your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share our podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.